Hello and welcome to ThisConnect. The vibe's a bit different, and as you can see, I'm all settled in. I suggest you guys do the same. And some of you have commented in the last podcast saying that, hey, we need a better balance between cars and bikes. So let me tell you right now, this one is all bike. No, bike. One bike. And that is
Super Meteor, not the Ultra Meteor. That will come to.
don't give them ideas. we'll stick with Super Meteor. So this is an experiment. Shumi's gone and ridden the Super Meteor. You've asked us a lot about the Super Meteor, what Shumi thought of it, and stuff like that. The point is that we're going to be doing things a bit differently, I think.
Yeah, so the idea here is I went and rode the bike and came back. We will do a full story on the Super Meteor, but it's going to take us a little bit of time. But what has not happened in the meantime is Karthik and I haven't had a chance to sit down and discuss the motorcycle together.
Not properly.
So we thought, what if we record that as the podcast and see what happens? So what I'm asking you to do is to participate in this, listen to it a little bit closer than usual, and then tell us which parts of it you really enjoyed so we can do more of, and which parts you thought dragged on a little bit so we can do less of. And if this becomes a format that you really like, then maybe this is how we want to do an initial first impression kind of thing for many kinds of vehicles and not just motorcycles.
And no, we will not be laying over shots of the Super Meteor over this conversation. Just to put it out there.
Yeah, I like the fact that we've got pattern.
So expectations have been set,
Yeah.
and let's get down with it.
Yeah.
Okay. For the people watching in, the process, right? Before we go in to any ride, drive event, there's always a few thoughts in your head about, preconceived notions, right? What you're assuming, what you're expecting. So what was there in your head before you went in? Until then, you'd only seen the bike in photographs. You'd not even seen it in the flesh at Ridomania, right? So none of that. So the first time you saw it was at this first ride.
Yeah.
So up until the point that you first saw it, rode it, what were the thoughts in your head? What were you expecting?
So typically, my method for test riding machines increasingly is that I don't want to have a thought in my head before I show up. I don't want to have preconceived notions at all. So when Royal Enfield did the live event, did I really pay close attention to what they were saying? Honestly, no. When the Ridomania reports started coming out from various media houses, did I really pay attention? Also, no. And did I speak to my friends in the industry and try to find out what they thought of the machine?
No, not in that sense. What I mean is from the standpoint that it's a engine that you're familiar with. It's a format that you know has certain boundaries. So from that sense, what was your overarching thought of what to expect? Is it going to blow you away, or were the chances of that happening? Or
I don't think a cruiser can blow you away. It's not a kind of motorcycle that is designed to blow people away. So you go into any cruiser first, right, with a very basic expectation saying it needs to be comfortable enough to ride, because making a cruiser super comfortable is just impossible, as far as I'm concerned. It's a format that compromises comfort right at the start of the design process. It comes from the United States as a format where we have great roads and not a lot of corners, right? And they derived the motorcycle out of that environment where did really great suspension matter to a cruiser? It didn't, because you didn't have much to absorb. And did great cornering ability really matter to a cruiser? Also, no. Expectations have changed since then, and cruisers have left that place and gone to places with worse roads. So my first thing about a cruiser is how comfortable is it? If it is comfortable enough for you to say, I'll be able to live with it, I think the job there is done. If you're expecting it to look like a sofa and therefore behave as comfortably as a sofa, you've just got your expectations wrong. Cruisers do not do that. They cannot do it. Street Naked could do it. ADV could do it. But a cruiser, there's no way to do it.
so this was not likely. Like, let's say if you're going in for the Himalayan 650 ride, the overarching sense of emotion or expectation would be much larger.
Yeah, because think about the purpose of this motorcycle, right? And you're aware of this conversation. So this is more for your benefit than his, really, because he's already on the same page. But a motorcycle format determines what things it is able to do. So if you go to a sport bike launch and expect it to have great ride quality, you've got the wrong expectation. It needs to corner really well. And when you come out of the corner and get on the gas, it needs to give you good feelings. That's what a sport bike does. In that way, what does a cruiser actually do? It needs to look good at standstill and low speeds. Are people in India really looking at cruisers going by at low speeds? Honestly, I'm conflicted. I don't think there's a clear answer to that. But that's one of the things that they did. Is it stable in a straight line? Given how long that motorcycle is, it's almost impossible to break that. You will get a stable motorcycle. Is it too stable or too raked out to the point where it is interrupting your ability to take a turn? That's question one. Is it comfortable enough to live with? Because it cannot be genuinely comfortable. The format will not permit you to make it.
Can I geek out here?
Sure.
Two things. The comfort angle. One is when the forks get pushed out further, the angle's worse. I mean, it's opened up more. The suspension can't work that well because it's at an angle, which is why the comfort aspect gets compromised. And second aspect is, of course, that the form factor, because it has to have that low swooping look, which means there's just less space to pack in longer travel suspension at the rear.
That's exactly right.
And which is why comfort is compromised.
And also, if you were to think of a cruiser having a monoshock, where then you can put a link and repackage the cruiser's location of the suspension, you still might be able to get a decent size rear shock. But as soon as you say we're going retro and we cannot do a monoshock, we have to have two struts, suspension struts, and they are going to do the job of absorbing. Where are you mount them? It inevitably ends up right under the rider's butt. There's no space, so you got not a lot of wheel travel. The seat height is low, it's compromised that space, and it's mounted under your butt. You just have to be able to make it comfortable enough for a guy to not complain 24 hours a day.
On that note, there have been some cruisers which have the horizontally slung monoshocks at the rear. And like the Harley Fat Boys have them hidden, right? They improve the experience. But do they function like any other motorcycle would?
I'm still saying the same thing. I'm saying the baseline is it comfortable enough to live with, as opposed to, wow, this is so comfortable.
Exactly.
Wow, this is so comfortable. Cruisers, they only look like it. They cannot.
So what I was trying to do with this was try and set the top and the bottom of the expectation range, right? Because this is a conversation that's going to be tricky. Because the interesting thing about cruisers is I think most of us as automotive enthusiasts, motorcycling enthusiasts, at some point would have had a cruiser either as a wallpaper or as an actual poster on our walls, because that was the epitome of big motorcycles in that sense, right?
Yeah.
But interestingly, I think from that point to now, the kind of top of mind or the desirability or the just the amount, how much that occupied your mind space has not really increased. If anything, it's shrunk.
It has shrunk.
So this segment, so to speak, is an interesting one to enter.
I think in the United States, as I said, because of the environment, it was a dominant segment. But because of our environment, cruisers cannot be a dominant segment until literally every road contractor knows what their job is. It cannot be done.
Right.
So we will be an ADV and a naked bike country for a very long time.
Yeah.
We could be a sport bike country if you think about it, because youth, excitability, and we do have some great roads here with corners in them. But where are the flat, straight, smooth roads?
Yeah.
They hardly exist. Where they are smooth, the tarmac isn't flat. So you're still bouncing. I'd just rather do that on an ADV, right? So the environment of a cruiser is a very limited environment, which leaves basically what I call the fringe enthusiast. They love their motorcycles, but not really to do many things with them. To them, I go to the shop with it, job one done. I go out in the night and cruise around the city roads at slow speeds. My job is done. Once or twice a year, I might venture out and take a long tour. And that's that. Within that fringe group, there will be the hardcore guys. You know, the Harley guys are guys who've taken cruisers and put 1 lakh kilometers and 8 lakh kilometers or whatever on Indian roads.
Right.
I'm not saying that is the rule of the cruiser segment. The rule of the cruiser segment is I like how it looks. I'm willing to live with the compromises that the format makes. And to me, if they are upgrading from, let's say, an Avenger onwards and then rising up the cruiser ranks, I suppose that for the money, this is about the best that they can do.
Okay. We'll get to the bike now.
Right.
Did it look good? Because in the pictures, it's been a bit underwhelming, and I have certain parts of it which didn't work for me.
So the surprise part of this is that in the parking lot at Jaisalmer, at the hotel where we were, there were the base models, which had the rear pillion pads removed, and they had an aluminium. One of the original accessories of Royal Enfield that was placed there. They looked a lot sleeker than they do in the pictures.
Okay.
So it looks like a thinner motorcycle rather than a fat, stubby one. And it looks actually quite interesting. The top models is what we got to ride. And that had the touring screen and the touring seat and the pillion pad.
Right.
When you add all of that to that motorcycle, it looks larger, which is good as a cruiser, but it also looks stubbier. So what they've done is they've got a proportionate design that actually changes dramatically as you add and subtract accessories and parts from the motorcycle. It's quite interesting. Can I call it classically good looking? It's almost there. In some of the paint colors, it
Almost.
was nice. Yeah, because for example, there is a very ornate Royal Enfield chrome logo on the tank. But the Super Meteor text on the side panel looks like some sticker guy did it in some shops locally somewhere, right? And I remember that you commented on it when you saw the pictures for the first time saying, what's this logo?
I just don't get it.
But finish levels are good. The build quality, I think Royal Enfield now has a handle on how to do these things, right? So I'm not surprised. It looks good. The frame rails are much fatter than normal because the frame is all new. So when you look at it, you do get the sense of the small things like the aluminum finish on the triple tree. There are things like that all over the motorcycle that tells you that design has played a part and it does look upmarket because of it, which I think for a cruiser is pretty critical.
Right.
So they have done that. So even if you were not to buy a single accessory from the Royal Enfield catalog, you're getting a machine that definitely looks expensive. Is it good looking? I think in many ways and from some angles it is. What I would wish for is the top model did not have the touring screen as standard at all.
Okay. I have a.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. I thought that why wasn't there more chrome on it? Like if you notice the front of the bike when you look at it, the
It's
fork,
black forks and a chrome bezel and that weird
and even low
U-shaped thing.
down the motorcycle.
Yeah.
I just thought that that was a bit.
So the strange thing is if you think about it, they built the cruiser, but there's more chrome on Mr. Clean.
That's true, and it's beautiful.
And the chrome on Mr. Clean is impeccable, right?
I love it. Yeah.
So maybe, how the Royal Enfield story is always playing out, where we saw the classic and we said, and then they said, no, there's more coming, and that a line evolves. So maybe there is a more chromed version coming later, which will be even more expensive. And look, they said prices were 3.5 to 3.8 lakhs or something. Imagine if there was a Mr. Clean version at 4.5 lakh rupees.
Right.
Immediately the conversation would have gone to, oh my God, so expensive for a Royal Enfield. So maybe it is just a strategic thing where the chrome will come later. But did I think that it lacked chrome? First glance, no, because the paint jobs are nice, retro, the color selections are pretty decent and all of that. So there is enough chrome, I think. The catalog has more chrome if you really want it. But cruisers also moved away from chrome. Remember the street rod and all that were all black.
Yeah. But that's exactly it. For me, they've gone for such a traditional part of the cruiser segment. If you think about
Chrome
it,
would maybe welcome there.
yeah, like you've gone what would be quintessentially the cruiser, right? It's not the fat boy of the cruisers. It's not the Diavel of the cruisers. It's not the.
It's like the generic template that you have in your head.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
It's like, okay, you told me that from 10 years ago, this was a Harley Davidson 650cc cruiser or whatever, mid displacement cruiser. You'd say, yeah, that's absolutely on point, right? And in that regard, to me, it was like, and it's the Indian audience as well, right? Like this is your poster moment coming to life at a price point which is extremely acceptable.
Yes.
Right?
True.
Like that little bit for me was like, man, that would have blown people's socks off.
So again, I would say that if I were Royal Enfield and I do not give you that much chrome to start off with, and I'm willing to sell you the chrome parts as accessories, I think there is a line of business there.
Yeah.
So you buy a motorcycle you can afford, and then you keep adding chrome as money accrues to you. You know how we said when we were talking about bike modifying? Well, I don't modify it like the whole and soul in one night. You've spent a lot of money and you get two versions of your motorcycle.
Right.
You change parts along the way. You get multiple versions of that. And I think that expense doesn't hurt so much because you're not spending so much money at a time. So if I were Royal Enfield, and I'm not saying this from a sign of this is a disingenuous way to increase business. I'm saying it's a very real and productive way to do it.
Yeah.
Right? So, okay, you wanted chrome exhaust, they're already there.
Because there may be other people who will say, hey, I don't want the chrome.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you don't have the chrome. You have the option right now. You want a fully chrome tank. Maybe it arrives on the market later and let's say, pick a number. Let's say it's 25,000 bucks. 3 years down the line, you had the cruiser, you're enjoying it and you want to change the look and you arrive and say, I want the chrome tank, and you put the chrome tank, you get a new look out of it. I don't think it's such a bad deal.
Okay. Now, so by and large, the design is the template, so to speak.
And it looks good.
And it looks good. And in person, it does better than it does in pictures.
Yeah, it definitely photographs worse than it is. Like I saw the pictures and I was like, I didn't think it was that stubby.
Did you have a favorite color scheme?
The flat color schemes, Like you saw the black one that they released the picture of the
Yeah.
base model. I think that looks smashing.
Okay.
But again, I'm not the traditional, I want lots of chrome kind of cruiser guy. I would generally,
With the black, the rest of it would flow actually.
yeah, so I would generally gravitate towards a darker color scheme on a cruiser anyway. If I had my own, I'd probably have like flat bars on it and it'll sort of slope down till the end, you know, like a drag style kind of thing.
Right.
And probably have mid-mount controls rather than feet-forward controls. I can manage feet-forward, but I don't think it works when I want to corner the motorcycle. I'd rather have my feet under my knees or further behind. So that's the kind of cruiser that I would gravitate toward.
Okay.
So in any case, I would gravitate and pick a darker color scheme over a. So did I not like the red and white one that I rode? No, it was nice. Is it something I would buy? Honestly,
No.
but it's a color preference. It's not a big deal.
Okay. So looks aside, to ride.
So what we said in the beginning is it needs to be comfortable enough. That it is. Okay. The surprise is that it does feel a little bit firm in terms of ride quality at the beginning.
Okay.
But preload is already at the softest, at the hardest.
Okay.
Let me rephrase that. So it feels hard right from the start. And it does more than you think. Okay.
So it's hard, but it absorbs more than
it
you
absorbs
think.
more than you think. So the first time you hit a small bump, you'll be like, wow, this is going to be a rough ride. But then as you get faster and hit different kinds of bumps, you realize that it does have a breadth of ability and it's not immediately out of its depth.
Okay.
What I'm surprised about is that the preload is at one end of the spectrum. I'm trying to remember whether it's at the softest or the hardest. I think it's at the softest. So it's at the softest, but it feels firm, which means there is no way for you to tune it down further.
So if you were traveling with a pillion or with luggage,
You'll be able to harden it further and maintain your ride.
Right.
But if you were to say, okay, I'm lightweight and I don't like it this way, or I'm heavyweight and I don't like it this way, you're already out of adjustments in one direction for sure. So I would prefer that manufacturers would always put the preload somewhere in the middle of the range. So I have some options up and some options down.
So this is like the polar opposite of what happened when the 650s came out, which were too soft at the rear and they would just be like
Yeah.
squishing.
So this, I could not possibly make this any softer if I wanted to.
Oh.
Right? So you're stuck with this suspension unit. Now, if you look at it as a trend, Royal Enfield showed us that the Meteor was a nice motorcycle in terms of ride quality. Very acceptable, very balanced. Classic 350 achieved something special, but I don't think it's the engineering that achieved it. It's just a combination of everything. Hunter suspension was weird, right? Because the rear was super stiff and the front wasn't. And I still don't know why that kind of an oversight would happen to a company of this level of engineering ability that they've shown again and again that they're able to do. This is another outlier in that sense. It's firm suspension, preload is at one end. Did it need to be so firm initially? Maybe there is a ground clearance issue because remember they have 130 or 135 mm ground clearance. Nobody really scraped a speed breaker. How do you do that? You do that by stopping the body from moving too much over the suspension. One way to do that is to make the rear
Doesn't have
stiff.
too much give in the first place.
Yeah. Right. So maybe that is the solution that they found to have a visually good looking ground clearance, but the ability to go over many speed breakers without scraping it. Right. Because I have scraped my Multistrada, for example, the 1200. Right. The 1200 had much softer suspension than the V4. You know how you do it? You hit a speed breaker and don't get off the brakes the entire time. Urban mode, set it one step softer than default, it will scrape. Because you're consuming the travel while you're riding the motorcycle just by not getting off the brakes on the speed breaker. I know a lot of riders who haven't figured out that getting off the brakes before the speed breaker gives you more ability to control what happens next. You do that with the Super Meteor. Keep the suspension soft and let the guy be on the brakes. He will definitely scrape it everywhere. And then he will come and say, hey, I told you 135 wasn't enough. Right. I remember people trying to get it to scrape with pillions on board. And I think the reason why it didn't scrape is because you can't make the suspension softer and it feels firm. And the up and down movement of the body on a suspension is very tightly controlled.
All right. So it's very interesting that you've started with the comfort angle and the suspension over here. So let's complete this. So the comfort factor, all the time that I've ridden bikes, there have actually been very few cruisers that have actually been comfortable, be it for the suspension or very often the ergonomics.
Yeah.
So
we were given the top model to ride.
Right.
That's the touring seat. And that was actually very good. I think I rode the bike from, I'm going to say 7 o'clock or 7:30 in the morning till about noon. And since we weren't making a film, it was not a lot of stop and go. It was a lot of continuous riding. 272 kilometers is, I think, what I returned the bike with. So that's one full tank full.
Right.
One full tank full without any major stops. By then, if the seat was going to hurt, it should have started, and it didn't. So the touring seat is awesome.
That's a long time.
Right? That also means that the stock seat cannot be, because then why would you pay for the touring seat? So from what I heard from other people who rode the stock seat, and I haven't, is that it wasn't that great. But I'm not surprised. This is what everybody does. Do I think that the stock seat will be good enough? Yes. Will you get an upgrade if you buy the touring seat and pay extra? Also yes. Visually, they are not the same though, which is to me a missed opportunity. Because there's more foam in the touring seat and it's a fatter looking thing. So if I were to take the base model, put the touring seat on it, I can't do a single seater anymore because the touring seat is a 1+1. I lose one thing there. And if I put it, then I just raise the size of the seat and then that visual sleekness sort of disappears. So I think there is more that the...
And do they have an option like TVS where you can, when you order the bike itself, you can switch the seat from the standard to the
So
touring
Royal
seat?
Enfield's MIY program has always been fairly good at these kind of things. So I don't know the specifics of it, but I'd be very surprised if you couldn't option it out of the factory with the accessories already installed.
Okay. Awesome. So, okay.
Now, the big part about comfort is the feet forward. It's not everybody's cup of tea. Okay? It makes a lot of weight sit on your butt, on your sit bones. And bicyclists get used to sitting on their sit bones. And it takes them also a while to break it in. So were there people saying tailbone pressure? Yes, there were. Mostly on the stock seat, not on the touring seat.
So this is that's why it becomes almost like a must-have.
Yes. But what they didn't give you is the option to have a second set of foot pegs that you can purchase off the accessory list and move the foot pegs to a slightly backward position where you'd have a more reasonable place to put your feet, or even under your feet if you wanted to put a flatter bar and make it a more sporty thing for yourself. Those options don't currently exist. So when you're going for a test ride, the biggest thing you want to watch out for, because this is a very familiar motorcycle, remember it's not brand new. The frame is brand new, but a lot of stuff is something Royal Enfield has already done. See that the foot peg position works for you, because at the moment, at least, the factory will not give you an option. Eventually, I think they will. But at the moment, they don't exist. So you have to live with that position. Was I comfortable at the end of 3 hours? Sort of. Would I have preferred foot pegs in the middle or even under? I'm not a cruiser guy. So yeah, obviously I would.
Okay. So comfort, looks, one thing in between, got to talk a little bit of specs. The frame's all new. So it's a longer wheelbase.
It is a longer wheelbase. The rake angle is a little bit more.
And you have upside down forks at the front. The tires are different. Sizes are different.
But bigger tires now.
Okay. The rear is
150, I think, but I don't remember numbers.
But not an 18.
16 and 18, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Super. Now the part that more often than not you would have started with the engine. But it's almost like
so
deja vu.
Yeah, in fact, this is a question that I asked Royal Enfield and I honestly didn't get a clear answer. Is that how is it that the Interceptor and the Continental GT have been on the market for 6 years? Now with owners knowing what the issues are, and they're reliable motorcycles, not much happens to them. But in the same breath, should the suspension not have gotten better by now? Because we know that suspension is the weak link in the whole package. I think it should. Would a lot of owners not go to the showroom, purchase the updated suspension and put it back on the Interceptors that they love so much?
I have people messaging me about that. Once that comes out, I'm going to get the shocks from that and put that on my bike. And
just don't do it. Don't do it. They're designed for a completely different kind of job at a completely different angle, and they're a completely different size. So you will spend an enormous amount of money on the upside down fork and then discover it doesn't do the job that you want. So don't do it.
On the rear shocks.
Yeah, so don't do that. And if somebody's going to do it, let them be the guinea pig. Let them come to a forum somewhere, including in MotorInc's comments if you like, and say that, yes, I tried it and it works, then spend the money. Please just don't go blind into this. So I'm going to say that what were you talking about?
We were talking about how the engine wasn't where you started off.
Yeah. So when I asked this question saying, where is the update? 6 years is a long time for a motorcycle to remain almost literally unchanged in the market. I didn't get a clear answer.
Right.
But I believe that they didn't really do much with this engine even now. They had to repackage some parts. Like if the tank has changed in shape, then there has to be an airbox has to adapt to the new shape. If they're going to make a new motorcycle which has new packaging, then some parts will change. So that exhaust, as you can see, is much longer, etc., etc. So obviously there's a new exhaust. because there is a new tank, there has to be a new airbox, which means that the intake routing also has to be changed. So if we were to look at the curves, and we didn't, I would say that the shape of the curve will change slightly. But the peak power, peak torque, it's all in the same place. The gearing will obviously change because the circumference of the wheel is changing, but I don't even think they've changed the sprockets much on this. So if you look at the Continental GT, the Interceptor, and the Super Meteor, for all practical purposes, they have exactly the same powertrain. So were there any surprises? No. But were we expecting surprises?
And that's a good thing.
Yeah. Were we expecting a surprise? No, we weren't. Because if you think about how an Interceptor or a Continental GT works today, it would fit very naturally into a cruiser. There is a lot of torque. It runs well into the higher revs if it needs to. It's got enough performance to get you to about 150, 60 kilometers an hour, which is all you really need. So this motorcycle doesn't have any vibration to complain about. You sit at something like 90, peaceful. It doesn't feel like it's going super fast. It doesn't feel like it's going slowly. It doesn't feel like there's any sense of strain. You're just sort of gliding along, which is exactly what a cruiser should do on good roads. Jaisalmer had some good roads, and on those, it just settled down and went. Would you not be able to do this at 120? Yes, of course you would. At 140, would it not feel like you were going fast? Yes, you would. Now, the touring screen to me is a challenge. Not because they've done a bad job of it, but because as the rider's height changes, a fixed screen of a fixed height being the only option on the menu will either work or like completely not work.
Right.
And that's the issue, right? So I had very minor buffeting. Can I live with that much buffeting? Yes. But do I really want a screen that large in a hot country like India? Absolutely not. But the other guys who had the base model and no screen at all came back complaining about wind blast.
All right.
Because the Bharatmala road is like 2 lanes wide and then shoulders, and it's arrow straight in it goes
they
from
were all like
Jaisalmer to Tanout, right? So you're sitting at 110 and there's literally no one there. There's not even traffic to watch out for. So you're like this. You do that at 110 with absolutely nothing protecting you, you are going to complain about wind blast. So should
They would be
Royal
going much faster in my books, because in my books, even on nakeds, and some amount of the design does affect the blast you're getting. Can reduce
But the
it.
meters are nearly flat down, no? So there is nothing to deflect the wind up.
But aren't you further back on the bike?
You are, but the blast is coming like this because there's nothing here to deflect it up around
So
you.
even at 110, you would affect it?
I mean, again, from Jaisalmer to Tanout would have been 130, 115, 17, something like that. If you're going to go that kind of a distance, just sitting at that speed, and there's nothing to interrupt you. Remember, it's almost as if there was cruise control and you'd hit 110 and just stay. That would get to you because you'll just get bored, right? There's nothing to occupy
Cruise
your mind.
control.
It doesn't have it because it doesn't have ride-by-wire, but I think this is the kind of bike that would have done well with it, especially on those roads.
That's exactly one of the things that I thought this bike would be a great time for them to bring in a few of the features.
I agree.
Right?
I think it's a missed opportunity. Because if this engine upgrade had ride-by-wire, which was then rolled back to the Interceptor and the Continental GT, I think the entire 650 range looks better because of it. There is functional benefits that come from it. OBD2s will come. Obviously, if they've launched the Super Meteor now, they're not going to put ride-by-wire by April. It doesn't make any sense. So did Royal Enfield miss an opportunity to genuinely upgrade their bikes? Yeah, I think they did.
Okay.
But anyway, if they're not willing to update the 650s for 6 years, ride-by-wire is hardly the thing that is going to change it, right?
So who would you imagine getting one of these? Would it be an upgrade for somebody who already has an Interceptor or a Continental?
So the iPhone has actually made this process quite simple, right? If you have a Meteor, then you get a Super Meteor. And then you ride it for 3-4 years, then they'll have the Ultra Meteor. And that's your...
So just from Meteor, like from a Thunderbird or a Meteor, if you're looking to step
Still
up.
look... To me, the problem with the Thunderbird was that it didn't look enough like a cruiser, although it pretended to be one. Okay, Royal Enfield calls it, I think, the Cruiser Lite as a format, LITE. I'd call it the pseudo cruiser because it's not really a cruiser. The Super Meteor is a little bit cleaner in design.
You mean you were talking about the Meteor there?
Thunderbird, then the Meteor. Thunderbird is the pseudo cruiser. The Meteor sort of became like a cruiser light. Thankfully, the Super Meteor actually looks like a genuine cruiser, and the frame, etc. Everything is designed to feel like a genuine cruiser. Right? So from that perspective, if you're in the cruiser world, what are your options? Avenger is your usual start point. Uske niche kuch nahi hai. Thankfully, the Enticer is not there anymore. Above that, what have you got? Right? Super Meteor. There's nothing else. Above that, what have you got? I think from Super Meteor, your jump first to the Vulcan.
Would you be okay with this being like the only bike in people's garage? Is that a...
If you accept the limitations of a cruiser, yes. Will this bike not tour? Yes. Does it have highway performance? Yes. Will it go around the city? Yes. but it cannot be more comfortable than a certain point. There's a line in the sand there. If you're accepting of that line in the sand, yeah, absolutely, you'd be able to live with it.
So
Would an Interceptor not be better in the city every single day?
right.
But an Interceptor looks like a certain thing. So does a Continental GT. So
So
does a Duke.
how much more of an advantage would an Super Meteor be over the Interceptor?
There will be no advantage. It's a specific taste that you're expressing by buying the Super Meteor.
All right, great point.
Functionally, every format will outperform a cruiser. Because the cruiser is a limited format. The visuals take such precedence that function has to be compromised. It's the form that you're buying. To me, as soon as you get those two wires crossed up, you're going to end up on a cruiser and regret it. You have to be very clear. I want the bike to look like that. And therefore, it will not be able to do these things. And I am okay with that compromise.
Okay, in my books, I think we've hit the nail on the head as to what the sense of the motorcycle is, where it really stands, and who it's for with that. So, is there anything else you want to add? Otherwise,
Well, I think by accident now it is the flagship of the Royal Enfield line of motorcycles. I say by accident because functionally it is the most limited of the formats, if you think about it.
Yeah.
Right? Form, it looks good. It looks expensive. It looks attractive. All of those checkboxes are cruiser checkboxes and they have been ticked off. No doubt about it. Every other motorcycle in the line, including the Meteor 350 because it's much lighter, will do more than the Super Meteor in some ways. Right? So in that sense, it's a strange flagship to have. But Royal Enfield is a retro company. The Himalayan line has functionally a well-developed, let's say, agenda. But can you accuse the Classic 350 of having a functional agenda in that sense?
yeah.
So it's a strange feeling for me where I would wish that a company with that much engineering and that much history and brand and all of that, I would want them to have a more functional motorcycle at the top of the pile, like a more serious motorcycle, as it were. But again, Royal Enfield's only thing is that they keep doing things, right?
Yeah.
So we are seeing one slice of the picture right now, and it looks like the Super Meteor is the king of the hill. But we know the shotgun will come. And because the shotgun will have, I think, foot pegs more in the middle, a flatter handlebar, I think it will handle better than this motorcycle. So the function component will go up a little bit.
I really, really hope after this that when the shotgun happens, that it genuinely has more character to ride. Like it actually gets a little trashy, in that sense, and becomes that. It brings a new taste to Royal Enfield.
That is, to me, the biggest thing that I think Royal Enfield has not been able to do. And I think that they should have, which is to take their two engines and then give them 2 or 3 different states of tune outside of rear wheel circumference being your change of gearing. So that you can genuinely say that the Super Meteor does this different. And then the Classic 350 does this different. And then the Meteor 350 does this different. And the Interceptor is different from the Cafe Racer in this way. And there'd be more differentiation than it looks like. If I were to swap 3 body panels, I'll get the other one.
Right.
And I certainly hope, although the hope is dim based on the history so far, that the shotgun is functionally different from the... Because think about it. If I wanted to dig a shortcut to the shotgun, what do I have to do? I change the tank. I change the handlebar. I change the foot peg position.
Stop it. No, we don't want to go there. We hope for the best.
No, I'm just saying, realistically speaking, it would be very easy to make a non-functionally different, visually different shotgun from the Super Meteor.
Right.
And I hope they don't.
We've seen one too many times that happen.
Yeah.
And not just Royal Enfield.
But we said this also, right? When we rode the Hunter also we said, why didn't Royal Enfield have a second state of tune for the J series, which would give the Hunter its own character? And I think that was a missed opportunity. So I'm hoping the shotgun, etc., don't go this way. I also think that this whole conversation will get washed away when the Himalayan 450 comes. If it's anything as good as what generally Royal Enfield bikes are. Because no matter what we say,
I'm not counting on it.
the Super Meteor 650 is a very nice cruiser. Above that is the Vulcan. Above that are really expensive Harleys. There's nothing in this ballpark. Right. And if you think about it, Harley Davidson tried to create a cruiser in this kind of price class. Yeah. And they ended up with the Street 750, which in all honesty, you couldn't tell apart from an Avenger in a parking lot.
But is the one Harley that I love.
And that engine.
It's the only Harley
that engine is insane, isn't it?
It's that engine is just fantastic.
And when you ride the Street Rod, which I loved riding, the Street Rod was really, really nice. But today, on the market, the Super Meteor 650 at its price point is literally an unbelievably good cruiser for the money. There's no way around that.
Right.
Is a cruiser everybody's cup of tea is the question that you must ask yourself.
So again, that's where we started, that what the expectations window should be, because I think people kind of blow it out of proportion, right? Expecting too much out of a particular format, and which, when you talk about a cruiser, it is so dictated by the form that it has to follow.
Correct.
That function does play kind of like a secondary role.
Yeah.
And so keeping those expectations in check, understanding what it is that you really want is important. And in that sense, you've clarified that
Yeah.
fairly clearly, that functionally it would be.
And honestly, any manufacturer who decides to take a cruiser and make it a high function motorcycle is going to end up with something that looks either like a street naked or an ATV. I mean, I can't see a way around it. So could Royal Enfield have improved the Super Meteor 650 substantially by doing something specific? Honestly, no. Would it have a little bit more appeal if the engine state of tune was slightly different? Perhaps. Would it have a better thing if the suspension was so sophisticated that despite all of this, it would give you a far better ride quality? Yes, but then it'd be 5.5 lakh rupees also. So at this price point, what the Super Meteor does, I think, is pretty good. I'm just saying that the entire format is not everybody's cup of tea, and you have to be super, super cautious about it because we are a single bike country.
Right.
If this was your second bike or third bike, then it wouldn't matter. But if this is all you're going to be able to ride.
Oh, quick question. Pillion?
I didn't take one on, but I was told that the pillion pads are substantial enough. The foot peg positions are reasonable enough.
So which is why we need a proper full test to happen sometime.
Yeah, and I don't see a functional challenge there.
Okay.
It's a long motorcycle with a long seat, so I don't automatically think
Some
there'll be a
pictures, I
problem.
thought that the foot pegs were a little high for the rear pillion.
Little bit because it's over the exhaust and the can is the biggest there. I don't think it's a functionally such a big challenge. And I know I saw the media reports which says, oh, the pegs are too high, pegs are too high. Just like riders, pillions are people with preferences. It is very, very difficult to say blanket statements like this will definitely be uncomfortable. I don't know. But I saw the panniers, the factory plastic panniers that Royal Enfield is selling. I was not impressed with what they look like. But outside of that kind of a format where the saddlebags go or whatever, accommodating luggage pillion on a tour on a Super Meteor 650 is going to be a little bit of a challenge.
All right. Okay, time's up. I think we've covered a lot. And anything else that remains, you can let us know in the comments. That's the idea. We've got the conversation rolling as you guys requested. So what else you want to know, let us know so that we can cover it when we eventually do the proper test and ride of the Super Meteor here at MotorInc, right? So,
and I'd also like to add that this was an experiment.
Yeah.
Which is not to say that you're guinea pigs, which is to say that you're participating in it. So what we'd like you to do now, we are about to close the video, is think about which parts of this video you really enjoyed and you'd like to know more about, let's say technical details. What we probably won't get into too much is comparing specification numbers because as we said in our previous podcast, the spec is not what it's about. It's the feeling that it's about. And did I have a good time on the Super Meteor 650? I did. Right? Which parts of this you thought dragged on a little bit or were not too relevant? Maybe because of the format or because we made too much out of something that is not important to you, whatever it is. Let's discuss that in the comments so that we can fine tune this into a format that is powerful for you to understand what just happened.
I'm going to bias you. I really enjoyed this conversation. I think this is one of the nicest ways to get to know a vehicle. We could even do it longer if you guys think it would work. That's a suggestion. I mean, it's a question.
You know what we can do? We match the length of this segment to how long you drove the vehicle.
Hey, what? You rode it for 3 hours. Okay. So, you know what you have to do. Let us know if you have any more questions. And for now,
disconnect. Ultra disconnect. Super disconnect. We should be able to upgrade our disconnect also.
cheerio.